So we were going to get into something way back.
Way back.
I believe this mess started around 2001.
Sounds about right. Yeah. You know, I think we had a whopping 20 stores and ish. Like, I think we were counting stores that weren't really stores, even when we said 20, or we were trying to get to 20. We were trying to get past that.
I think that's probably the right version, because 1999 is when we opened our first franchise location.
Correct.
And then moved into the Toledo opportunity, I think 2001. And that started because Marty Schlisbury at Paramount knew Barry Greenblatt in Toledo and just thought, hey, these are good people and these are good people, and they're kind of doing ish the same thing. Maybe we should try to put them together in some fashion, right? And just introduced us, I think, is where that originally came from.
Well, in my mind, where it originally came from is you were sitting around saying, we're not selling enough franchises, you know, and you were really impatient. I mean, which has always been great, that level of impatience. But yeah, I mean, in 1999 we opened 2, right? One in August and one in October.
Yeah.
And store 5. When did Deb open originally?
We signed store 5 in July of 1999.
Okay.
I think that one opened sometime in 2000.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember because it was we signed that on my dad's birthday, July 31st.
Oh,
also, just that was store 5 with Deb, and we also signed that during Common Ground. You remember Common Ground?
Oh yeah, I do. I do.
That was going on, and we signed that contract, and we also signed Gary Granger.
Gary Granger, store 11.
Yeah, with Emerson Ole.
Oh yeah.
The wart on the pickle.
And Jeff
Jeff McCalvey, yeah. And Jeff McCalvey wasn't involved in any of that part of it.
No.
And he became our guy. He became Jeff McCalvey in our world for so many years. And Emerson well, Emerson passed. Remember going to his funeral? What a legendary funeral that was. It wasn't even really a funeral. It was that they did it in the basement of some state building. Remember, it was a catered event, and his kids had put the money together to have a chair at Michigan State in his honor. I think in the business school, right? Was it the business school?
I actually don't remember. I just remember that he was like a fixer. He was like the guy you brought in. You know, he's the James Baker of the Granger group there.
And that guy's magic.
Yeah.
Similar to Barry, by the way. Similar to Barry he was just the nicest guy, right?
Yeah.
And so when he asked you to do things, you were like, well, of course, and you'd like get all over it because you didn't want to disappoint Emerson. That's right. No.
But yeah, I mean, you know, we're a whopping chain of like notmuch.com, and you were like, we got to get this thing rolling.
Well, yeah, and Barry, so how that went, and you know, I think these exercises are cool because you know how everyone has their own version of reality. Well, you and I are going to experience that here together, right? Because like you don't remember Emerson's funeral, but for some reason that was a big deal in my life. Like you were there. I remember we sat together during it. But we originally went because we were going to put coffee in Barry's stores.
Yeah, Barry's Bagels. Barry Bagels. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was going to open a couple of locations was the other thing, right? So he was going to do the one on Monroe Street in Ottawa Hills.
Yep.
The old Friendly's location.
Yeah.
And then he did the one next to, like, joined with Barry Bagels on Dussel. That one's still there.
Yep.
The one on Dussel is still there. And that's how we originally went down there. And I remember we were having a conversation this week about our core value, kick ass.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember putting a whole bunch of effort into the cover of the proposal that we made him. And I had drawn it, and I had like colored pencils out, and I was coloring it, and it was Barry. Somehow I got an image of Barry juggling bagels.
Yeah.
He was standing on top of the BIGGBY logo,
Yeah.
like sort of off kilter juggling. I mean, way too much time into that little thing, but
Yeah.
I remember how good it felt when I set it down and he noticed it, right? He was like,
Yeah.
wow, look at, so where'd you get that image? And it was like from a coloring book.
Yeah, the kids coloring book at
Yeah.
yeah.
So we made that proposal to him, and I think that proposal was the coffee in his stores, and then I don't even think it was 2 franchise locations. I think it was 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he
Yeah.
accepted, he
Yeah.
accepted that.
Yeah. And Barry was just the kind of guy that when you were in his presence, you always felt good. When you were in his presence, he like folded you in. You always felt like things were going to work out.
Yeah.
With Barry, the
Magic
world
of
was
Barry.
infinite.
Kind of like Emerson Owl, right?
Yep.
He's certain.
And
I don't think you and I do that to people.
no, we will never be accused of that. That's for darn sure.
I wish.
But he had really built an empire
Oh.
in Toledo,
Well, and Ann Arbor.
And Ann Arbor, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And everything that you ate at Berry Bagels was amazing.
Delicious.
Like amazing.
Yeah. And he had these loyal people.
Yeah.
Like people that had worked for him for 30 years,
yeah.
35 years, and they were incredible. There's one woman in particular.
I know who you're talking about. I'm struggling with her name as well.
Isn't that terrible? I mean, it's been 20 years, so like, but be nice to remember that.
Yeah.
But he had these people that were so loyal, and
Yeah.
they had the same sort of energy as he did, right? It was always like folding you in, taking care of you.
Add a strong dose of freneticness.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
My image of Barry was at his original location. He still had this wall phone with like a 30-foot cord on it. And it was kind of in the back of the house, but there was a window to the back of the house. And you would never design a store like that, but it was like the most amazing location. And he would be on that phone constantly talking to people. And we learned later that being on the phone with Barry, he controlled that conversation. You know what I mean? So
yeah. And you called him and you knew exactly where he was. He had the apron on.
Yeah.
Standing behind the counter. He was talking to you, but talking to the customer at the same time.
Yeah.
He would come and sit for a meeting for 3 minutes or 4 minutes. He'd be up again and gone. It was just, and I really, I was reflecting on, what I learned from Barry. And I think one of the things that I learned from Barry was always have forward momentum.
Yeah.
He was always doing something,
Yeah.
right? And they were big things, they wasn't like, remember at one point he was tackling Columbus, and he was spending like days on end in Columbus, like researching and doing the work. And
he dragged us down there.
Remember? The other thing about Barry was, it was the whole thing was a lifestyle.
Yeah.
There was zero differentiation between his life, his work, his family. It was all mixed into one big bag and like shaking.
Yeah.
Open.
There was only one Barry.
Yeah.
Whether work, family, personal.
Yeah.
I think that's another lesson, by the way. That
I agree.
That there's only one you, and you don't have to modify to fit those different categories,
Yeah. I remember times when like Marnie would walk in, one of his daughters, and like the world would stop. Didn't matter what was going on for 30 seconds or whatever, and everybody have to say hi to Marnie and how was Marnie doing and how was school. And I think she was at Harvard, wasn't she? Was it Marnie that went to Harvard?
Yeah.
Just so impressive. And I remember Barry telling me that he had signed a contract for an apartment for her in Boston. It was $3,800 a month. And I mean, I like almost fainted.
You know,
I couldn't imagine. I mean, $3,800 a
no,
month.
for sure. And that sort of explains why, too, Barry needed all this forward momentum. I mean, you know what I mean? Like he had all
Totally.
these commitments out
Oh,
there, and he was all in on all of it all the time.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
he couldn't for a moment plateau. He couldn't for a moment take a step back or anything, because, you know, not that it was a house of cards or anything like that, but he needed
Yeah.
that momentum.
Yeah. 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 Well, and so we did end up putting all the coffee in his locations.
Hmm.
And there, it was there for 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he ended up opening both Dusseldom and Rose Street, I think, in relatively short order of each
Yeah.
other. But all the while, we were working on this deal with Sufficient Grounds,
Yeah.
and we were going to try to buy Sufficient Grounds.
Yeah. And Sufficient Grounds was a 5-unit chain in Toledo,
Yeah,
owned by,
four bona fide stores,
yeah.
and then they had the two hospital kiosks,
Yeah.
one of which was like nothing, and then the other
Nothing.
one
Yeah.
was, yeah. Um,
And a bakery.
oh gosh, yeah. So we worked on that with Barry, remember? And
Yep.
Marty Schlisberg really facilitated that. Uh,
Totally.
he lent us some money to do that deal.
Yep.
I think Marty's endorsement of us and Marty's endorsement of Barry kind of made us come together much more quickly.
Completely.
Like, hey, these are good people. They're gonna,
Yeah.
and it really it proved out in so many ways, right?
I never really understood completely why Marty did that, except, you know, it was sort of some guaranteed coffee poundage. Like, although he loaned us money for it, he was going to get it back through, you know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but uh, you know, sorry to say this a bit. I mean, we were just a bunch of clowns still at that point in time. Not to say that much has changed, but I'm just saying, why did this guy step out on the ledge for us, who was our vendor, to loan us money to put this deal together?
I mean, I think Marty probably had pretty good radar around like intention and I think he believed in us. Yeah, but you also have to remember it was 100 grand he lent us. I mean, it wasn't like he was like going deep to support it. I mean, 100,000 is 100, and he was going to pick up a whole bunch of poundage, right? So,
For us, that was everything,
oh gosh,
you
I mean,
know?
well,
And I
we
remember we
closed
had to come up with our end of the deal, which was like 50 or something like that.
72. It was 72,000, and
Okay.
this is gonna be crazy. So this part of the story,
Yeah.
if I didn't, if it, I couldn't make it up. So we had been working with the gentleman in Grand Rapids, super smart guy. What the hell
Yeah.
was that? The guy that did the ISP and all
Yeah.
the these we should remember these names.
Is Jason a first name?
Yeah, Jason is his first name. His mother, sweet
Yep.
woman, ran it forever. His sister was involved. I mean, these were
Yep.
like sophisticated people,
Yep.
right? And so they were working on. We did a 5-store deal with them,
Yep.
and they wrote us a check for that 5-store deal for it was $70,000,
Mm.
and we had to have 72,000 to close the deal with Barry. And these are details that like it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So we closed the deal on Wednesday with Jason and his family. We closed Sufficient Grounds on Friday.
Yeah.
Right. So that $70,000 came in and was instantly gone, and we put it into Toledo with Barry.
Yeah. Because I'm sure we had at least $500 in our bank account.
We probably had to borrow or two for real, it'd be fun to talk to Jason about that
Yeah.
now, how many years removed. I actually thought I saw him the other day, but but then that deal with Sufficient Grounds, we had it reasonably well put together.
Yeah.
And I remember Barry and I you and Mary were coming down in the afternoon for the sort of like store meetings and with all the people. And Barry and I went and met with the owners one last time in the morning.
Yeah.
we were sitting in the, and I'll never forget this. Mike, um, oh God, Bob, we can't do this without names. We
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
name. Uh, Started with a D. Jen was the daughter.
Yeah.
Again, cool people, right? Well, anyway, we sat down with the husband and wife for one last meeting, and he said, and you'll be bringing a check for inventory
Mm.
to the
Yeah.
closing, and I was like, and I didn't, there was no way, right? It
Yeah.
was like $44,000.
Yeah.
Out of necessity, I just said, no.
Yeah.
Right. We're
Yeah.
not planning on it, but that's part of the purchase price. In hindsight now,
Yeah.
I mean, it was perfectly reasonable for him to think that it was the purchase price plus inventory. Like that,
Yeah.
that's kind of how you would think about doing that deal. And so
But he couldn't wait to get his family out of this.
the DeBackers.
Debackers. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Backers, Mike and Jan.
Right.
Yeah, he wanted, everybody wanted to do the deal.
Yeah.
I think there was some sadness that the family wasn't going to be doing all of this together anymore, but
Yeah.
everybody understood and knew that it was the right thing to do. So they wanted to do the deal, but I just had to stand my ground because there was no way in the world we could come up with $44,000.
Yeah.
So I just sat there and I was like, no. And I mean, bless his soul, but
Yeah.
I mean, he lost his cookies. I mean, he
Yeah.
lost it. He was furious,
Yeah.
right? He, Barry and I just kind of ended the meeting and we started to walk out and I just said, well, let us know, right?
Yeah.
Because at that point the deal was done. It was over.
Yeah.
Right. And I said, well, let us know. And we get to the car and Barry, we're walking to the car and Barry said to me, because Barry was well healed. We
Yeah.
weren't, right? And so Barry's like, was that necessary? And I don't know what I said because I didn't want to tell Barry we didn't have any money, but anyway, that was a dramatic moment. And they came around and we did the deal and it was exciting. It was an exciting time. I wouldn't want to relive it, but
Our first and only acquisition,
is that our only?
I think. And our hairs got so singed on that, I think it made us think twice. Again, one of the lessons out of that is if you buy a local coffee shop and you're an outsider, everybody will hate you immediately.
Yeah.
From the employees to the consumer. So
Yeah.
our magic was our buying power saved us so much money on cost of goods sold that it seemed like a slam dunk. And the thing that we didn't know is the attrition rate that would happen both from an employee perspective, who the employees were basically running the stores and doing whatever they wanted anyway, and then also from a consumer perspective, we just immediately sucked, even though we didn't suck.
Right. Well, the thing was, I think everything would have been fine.
Yeah.
So he had built Monroe Street. He owned Monroe Street himself. And Dussel. And we had on a handshake said to Barry that we would incorporate those into B3.
Yeah.
And which was Barry Bagels and BIGGBY B3.
B3, the original B cubed.
Yeah, the original. And so, but the problem was that so we'd shaken his hand and we'd said we would do it. And then we did. And that was our demise because the negative cash flow on that Monroe Street. Was that Monroe Street? It was Monroe Street, right? Yeah. On that Monroe Street store in Ottawa Hills was so bad that it just sunk the whole deal. And it sunk the whole deal, right? Had we not taken on that negative cash flow, I think the business probably would have been okay and been fine. We would have rode off into the sunset of sorts.
And a little minor detail, I believe we did not disclose that to the bank.
No, that was the problem. Yeah, we didn't exactly tell them we were doing this. And so had we, they would have told us we couldn't.
Yeah.
And then we would have had to go to Barry and not lived up to our word that we would take that on. And he would have had to figure out Monroe Street. We were, quote, good guys, which we were. And we lived up to that commitment. I think we knew if we'd gone to the bank, they would have said no. And I think we figured just in some magical way, we'd pull it out. And oh, by the way, we did.
Yeah.
I mean, it was god awful.
a horrible,
Right.
horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's where I learned what the word covenant meant.
Yep.
And you know, all the way up to that point for us, you know, banks would have us sign documents, and you know, they would basically say that, you know, if if this goes bad, they'll take everything. And of course, we had nothing, so we were like, yeah, sure, you can have everything. And but we were just at that precipice where things were beginning to aggregate, and suddenly somebody taking everything meant something, you know.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah, that's true. And so just to give the background on what happened,
yeah,
you know, we take this on, um, and it just sucked us
yeah,
dry. I mean, I think I remember it was like 7, 8 thousand a month in negative
yeah,
cash flow because it was a big building
yeah,
and you know, expensive to run and whatever. I mean, I could be wrong about those numbers, but that number seems to, and that was leading the rest of the company and
yeah,
actually taking our balance sheet pretty dramatically.
yeah,
So, right. So then it was December 27th, I believe. It was in between the holidays.
yeah.
And the guy, I'm not gonna remember his name, the banker. It's just,
Tom,
oh,
Tom, that's
he was
Tom.
the he was the president. Tom was the president.
Yeah,
Our banker was the other guy.
yeah, right.
Nice guy, right? But just, I mean, you know, in fairness to him, like we did this to ourselves. He you know, I hate to say inept because I don't think he was inept. I just don't think he was paying attention. Like,
Yeah,
was he supposed to be in our file every month looking at stuff? I
yeah,
mean, maybe, but
right.
whatever. So anyway, they came and sat down, put us in default, which meant interest rate went up to 11.5%, doubled our monthly payment.
Yeah,
They took all of our cash, personal and
they
professional.
controlled our checking account.
Yep. All revenue went into a checking account that they owned. We didn't,
Yeah,
right? They would disperse money to our account
yeah.
based on approval of spreadsheets. I remember one time I walked into his office and I was trying to get a bunch of stuff paid, right? And I had to get $38,000 moved or whatever, you
Yeah,
know. And he said something like he kind of fucked with me, kind
yeah,
of, you know. It's kind
yeah,
of like it wasn't just and so I remember I used to wear my keys on my belt. You know,
yeah.
they used to hang and flop, you know, like every good restaurateur. And so I remember I unclipped them and I took them and I chucked them in his head and I walked out.
Yeah,
Right. I mean, I was done. I was done. I was like gonna go live with my mom and dad again.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
that's where I was in my brain. It's like, okay,
yeah,
this is and I knew we had him because he came running down the hallway after me, right? And apologized and I said okay, you know, but like that's not the way this. I mean, we're working our asses off here to
yeah,
fix this, make this
yeah.
right, and you know you can't mess with us, right? Like so anyway, and then I did, and then you pulled us out of that, by the way.
Well, I mean,
Oh, what was his that oh, was he
Wayne
beautiful?
Winchell,
Wayne Winchell, yeah.
long-standing, you know, this is a thing where like relationships really do matter. And
Yeah,
you know, it wasn't good money. You know, I mean, we paid a high interest rate, but you know, how do you get it? Like if this was your home and you're being foreclosed on, and the solution is to get another loan, but you're in foreclosure, how do you do that?
right.
And yeah, I mean, I just went to Wayne, laid it all out. You know, he always had a soft spot for me and what I was up to. It went back to the flapjack days. And you know, I felt about 12 years old signing those papers. You know, like I felt 12 and like I was sitting in front of my dad. But you know, Wayne, as a person, just stood up for us.
He did.
Yeah,
Did you oh, my brain just went somewhere. Where did my
yeah,
brain go? So it was, you know, oh, also Marty
yeah,
stood up for us
he
too.
did.
And we had that meeting. I remember the meeting, and we got really aggressive with the banker
Yeah,
on Marty's behalf.
yeah,
And we were in default, right? So we had no position. And then I remember Marty just saying something really quite nice and honorable, right? And about you and I. And then he basically said, you will now be losing my business.
Yeah.
Remember,
Yeah.
to Comerica,
That's right.
based on this. And then he told us, you know, I know you guys are good for it. Don't worry about my 100,000 or whatever you owe me.
Yeah.
We'll get that done in the end, but just go fix the business, right? Well, I mean, just really, and we did pay him back, right? I mean,
Yep.
with
All of it.
interest.
Yeah.
But I remember he stood up for us, and he did move his business. He moved away from Comerica after that. I remember.
He
I remember
did.
it. Yep.
He did. Yeah, I mean, again, you know, having good relationships out there, that really paid off.
I remember I was with I was on Josh Linkner's podcast, and I like Josh a lot, and he was telling this story. I don't know how we got into it, you know. And you know, he said at the end of the story, you know, I just said something, but like we did this to ourselves. Like we can't forget that, right? Like
Yeah.
you can be mad at the banker, you can be mad.
Sure.
We did that. We made a decision that was a really bad decision, and
Yeah.
we didn't just. And I remember him saying, you know, he said something like, "You don't hear that often, Mike." Like
Mhm.
somebody admitting that they screwed up, they made the mistake, they
Yeah.
got themselves into this awful situation,
Yeah.
and that it really wasn't the banker's fault. The banker was just having to do the banker's job, which is
Yeah.
protect the bank, you know. So yeah, that's the truth of it. That's the truth of that whole story is we screwed up,
Yeah.
right? We should have known better. And but you know, at the end of the day, those stores are still there.
Yeah.
Um, they've made a ton of money over the years, right?
Yeah.
If you think about the tenure of those stores and how long they've been there and what our original investment in that whole operation was $72,000.
I mean, yeah, yeah. If you talk about return on investment, huge. But you know, I can't let us get out of this story without mentioning Tony DiPietro, and then also,
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
we all basically moved to Toledo, and we were living in Barry's guest house in order
yeah,
to pull this thing out. But you know, that we had hired Tony, and you know, he had this highfalutin job of basically director of this area or whatever, at a good salary and so on. We pulled him away from a good job. He was a friend and an acquaintance of yours from a life before. You thought he would do really good, and you know, we got into this. Of course, we all took pay cuts that probably went down to zero, if I remember correctly, or at least,
no, they
you
were.
know, like the base that it would take to pay our bills. And we had to ask Tony to take a pay cut,
50%. He took a
50%.
50%, yeah, and started working 100 hours a week.
And he stayed, you
He's,
know,
yeah.
he stayed.
You
And
know, the other piece of that story was we had to, and this is sort of the underbelly of it. You know, we had to come up with cash,
yeah,
and
fast.
we went to Barry and asked for cash. You
Yeah,
remember?
yeah,
And um, we felt like our side of the story was that you know we took on this boat anchor of a
yeah,
store that basically ruined us
yeah,
because of living up to our word to him.
yeah,
And then here we were needing any dime, anything.
yeah,
And I remember it was a dramatic moment. We were sitting with Barry, and these were hard meetings, you know. And
yeah,
I'm sitting with Barry, and you were like, "Hey, can we get 10 grand?"
yeah,
And he said no.
no,
And then he said, "Can we get 5 grand?"
yeah,
He said no.
no,
I think you went all the way down to like 500. You were
yeah,
like, "Can we get $500, Barry?"
yeah,
And he said no.
yeah,
And that was a real breach of honor, I think, for
yeah,
us, you know. And I look back on it, and I mean, Barry was supremely pissed, I'm
yeah,
sure, about
yeah,
the situation we put him in.
yeah, sure.
And so he was like, like you're
Yeah,
not getting a thing.
yeah,
Figure it out.
yeah,
And we did, and we bought him out,
yeah,
and we paid him a good price. Like, I
yeah,
mean, it wasn't like, oh my God, he made a mint of a return. But I remember
yeah,
we bought him out. It was a reasonable return
yeah,
after we got through everything.
yeah,
We bought him out. Um, and I remember you saying something like, you know, this didn't work with Barry, but we were transitioning our bagel business to him, or
yeah,
we had, I think we had, and you were like, we're going to pay him back with how many bagels we buy.
for sure, which turned out to be millions and millions of bagels.
Millions and
And
millions and millions.
yeah,
Yeah. So I
yeah,
remember that whole, and then Barry in the end, we still had a great relationship.
yeah,
Everything we saw him, it was just beautiful.
yeah.
So, but yeah, that whole moment of trying to save it, living in Barry's guest house and working, it's incomprehensible hours at this point.
Yeah, I
Open to,
mean,
yeah.
and the other side of that equation, and this is one thing that I guess maybe some people don't realize sometimes, but then we still had to go out and sell more franchises and be smiling, and I mean we're under
We were
duress,
servicing franchises. Yeah.
we're under absolute duress of the worst kind, I think, in business, and still had to show up like, you know,
Yeah.
he's good and okay.
Yeah. I remember there was a moment, I don't know how long it lasted. I would guess probably a couple months, where I was going to Toledo on Sunday nights, and I was opening the downtown store, closing the downtown store at maybe 5 p.m. or
Yeah,
6 p.m., and then going to the West Cricket West and closing the Cricket West store
yeah,
at 11 p.m.
yeah,
and getting back to Barry's guest house at midnight. Then getting up, and I did that Monday through Thursday.
yeah.
I would drive home Thursday after the close of downtown. Tony would stay
Hmm.
in Toledo and continue to work that. And then I would go home, and then I would do the stuff that had to get done inside of Global Orange.
Yeah,
Because like you said, we were still running a franchise company,
yeah,
right? We still had that responsibility, and we had franchise owners that had signed contracts and that we were trying to take care of. And,
yeah.
obviously at the end of the day, we pulled it all out, but I mean, that was a pretty deep scrape of the knee there. I mean, that was a doozy.
Yeah,
And I look back on it. I don't look back on it fondly, frankly.
yeah,
I don't. I mean, I
yeah,
look back on that as like it was gut wrenching,
yeah,
and I remember many moments, Saturdays, Sundays, sitting in the office. You were there
mhm,
working,
yeah,
grinding, and like it was just like pure exhaustion,
yeah,
But like, what are you gonna do?
yeah,
What?
yeah. And so many times the story is told, and it just feels like some kind of Cinderella story where everything goes up and to the right. But that was a real kick in the you know what.
Yeah,
And I do like to bring reality to the table. Like when we're speaking to people, students or whatever, they're we were this close to actual bankruptcy in the business, and we were at about 20 units.
yeah.
And 20 units in franchising, you're not even cash flowing. I mean, you're not making. If we were lucky, we were making $24,000 a year.
I think that's about what we were
Yeah,
making at that point. Yeah,
and you could pay your bills sort of on
right.
that. You couldn't take much hiccup, and that this was like the world's biggest hiccup,
Yeah,
for us.
yeah, yeah. I've often thought about like, what if that banker hadn't walked out and followed me down the hallway?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
well, how would things have turned out differently? And it's those, yeah.
Or if
So
if Wayne didn't show up, or if
right.
Tony didn't take his pay cut, or if
Marty hadn't
yeah,
backed us.
yeah,
I mean, all this stuff, right? And even Barry. I mean, there was a moment when Barry didn't support us. I think that
yeah,
was relatively fleeting.
yeah,
I'm sure he was like a 9.8 out of 10 pissed off at us
yeah,
at that point about what
yeah,
we had done but otherwise, I mean, he was very supportive throughout all of it, other than that one moment. And yeah, I don't look back on it fondly at all.
yeah,
I mean, I know we learned it. They say you learn the most through your difficult times.
totally.
Totally.
We learned a lot, and it begs a question for me sometimes whether your success in business is that is that luck, is that, I mean, what are the things that made that happen? and certainly we worked hard and buckled down and did whatever, whatever needed to be done. But it is, by the grace of whatever, that we survived that. And as we just listed off, there are so many people that had a high impact on that, and actually kept us afloat, kept us going, and so on and so forth. Is that luck? What is that?
So I think it's something called grit.
Yeah.
I do. I think it's this thing that no matter what happens, you'll never give up.
Yeah. But why did those people step forward for us? That's so there was one that didn't, the Comerica dude, who was, fulfilling his needs on his file drawer. But there were so many that stood up.
Yeah.
That's not our grit. What is that?
I mean, I believe that I think in your soul whether people are good people.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
And I would say each one of those people that you listed off knew that we were well-intentioned, that we were going to do everything in our power to pay them back and live up to our commitments and so on, right? And so I do think that there's a big part of it is just that sort of sort of that authentic engagement around not giving up.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to give up. We're just not going to give up. And I still feel like that today. I mean, I look back at COVID and, I had to do my lifeline again this week, and I didn't even mention COVID.
Yeah.
And somebody brought that up. Like, how do you not? And I'm like, I don't even know. Like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Yeah.
But I don't think one time throughout that whole thing was I truly worried that we were going down. I mean, there were some moments that were high anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think mainly more because of health and family and, what was going to happen. But like, I don't know. So that's my answer is I just think that it's grit, and it's that people can sort of sense and smell intention.
You call it grit. I think we show up. Like when the chips are down, I think we always show up.
Yeah.
That it's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Well, that's the Barry story.
That is the Barry story.
Yeah, we never mentioned Mark. Mark was an integral part of all of that too.
Yeah.
And they were just good people. They were fun people. Like that was the other piece of it. I mean, how many times did we drive home from Toledo just filled to here with like Italian food from Mancy's, and not being able to walk because we had eaten so much with Barry. And
no, for sure. And Mark being Barry's son, who was like Barry Jr.
Yeah.
If he wasn't Mark, he was Barry Jr.
And just a joy, I mean, he really was. It was a pleasure to be with him and spend all that time. We spent a ton of time with those guys at one point, and unfortunately that relationship's drifted apart, but I think that kind of naturally happens at times,
It does. It does. So yeah, I mean, we survived that particular moment. It was really early on, and it did catapult us forward, right? I mean, the way we started this story is kind of, you were pacing back and forth like, this shit isn't moving quick enough. We need to be selling more franchise. This was a way, I think, to get us from like 15 and over the 20 mark of number of units. Like that was going to be a big number, and the number that was going to slingshot us forward. And in many ways it did
in the end, and I think it was a proving ground too.
Yeah.
It's like I mean we learned a ton.
That's right.
And so that's true. It did. By the time we came out of it, I wonder how many stores we were. By the time we would say like we sold it to Muhammad took it over. We paid Barry. We got our money. Like, I wonder how many stores we had at that point. My guess is it was probably in the range of 40 or 50.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that wasn't, we were so distracted by Toledo.
Yeah.
We were doing all of this over here too, that like, had we not had the distraction of Toledo, this over here might have seemed slow.
Yes.
And boring.
Boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that selling to Muhammad intersects with another story that I hope we cover at some point in time, and that is the meeting of Fred DeLuca from Subway, who basically said, you guys got company stores, you got franchise stores, and you're not doing a great job at either one, right?
Yeah.
And so that statement became the impetus to become 100% franchise, but that's for another time.
Yeah, that's a hell
But a
of a
lot of interesting things happened to us very early on,
Yeah, that's, you look at, we're 30 years old next year, and these stories that we're telling are all within the first 10.
Yeah.
And, I think that's probably about when most companies have a lot of their tumultuous stuff going on,
For sure. And that's why a lot of companies don't survive past 5, or certainly not past 10, because you have to get through these moments. You really do. They're your training ground. They're your rite to passage. It's a whole bunch of things. And I think you and I are very fortunate in that we had each other, right? We're built a little bit differently, but have same goals, same values. But the counterbalance of each of us is one of the things that has allowed us to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. That I was just told this story yesterday to a student in my class. And it's for him, he was just wondering about the partnership, and I said, well, it's strange. It's like, doesn't feel like it's been 30 years.
Yeah.
It still feels very, very, still feels like what it felt like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I guess there's more stability now a little bit, but yeah, we've been so fortunate to have this complementary thing going on. And I said to him, I said, I think the fundamental piece of all of making that work, because he had a founding relationship with two other people last year on a startup that failed.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I think the founding principle on how this worked is respect.
Yeah.
Just always staying in this place of respect, right? Like, it would crush me to do something where you felt disrespected, right? And I think that's the fundamental, and then it all goes from there, right? Yeah. And I said, it sounds to me like you all, meaning his founding team, you lack that. Like, you didn't have respect for each other, and the one guy like bailed with the IP because it's like that you didn't have respect, right? So, yeah, that's Yeah, we're a big part of the story. Our relationship's a big part of the story.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been great. So we're going to do Subway. Maybe we'll do that next time. We also want to talk about Kevin and Keong and
for sure. But we got to get through Subway part 1.
Part 1.
Because there's a 2 and a 3.
Yeah, part 1, and then Dale Mulder and Kevin Bassner. And then Subway and Lisa and all of that. Because then there's actually part 4 and part 5 of the Subway engagement. If you include the last 5 years. Yeah. All right. Well, is that a wrap on this one?
I think that's a wrap.